everyone, and welcome to this episode of Dark Tales with Zelda. Tonight, we've got a really good story if you like mystery and unsolved, unknown, paranormal, the who did it, who is it, what is it. That's what this episode is going to be. Now, before we get started, I want to just give you a little disclaimer that if you get scared easy, you might just want to pass this one by. And we'll see you again next time. But for those of you that like a little creepy story, you're at the right place. Now, before we begin, I want to explain. These stories happened a while ago, before there was internet or before there were cell phones or anything like that. It was landlines. I worked on a psychic line, and believe me, there were a lot of things, a lot of unexplained circumstances. I wrote down all of these stories. And some people say, well, Zelda, why didn't you save it on your BlackBerry? What? BlackBerry didn't exist back then. Palm Pilots, BlackBerries were the first devices that came out. Yes, that was a while ago. So I wrote them down. The pages are getting a little old, a lot of old, but they still have these great stories that I want to share with you. Now, I want to talk about the cards. I'm reenacting this. I wrote down the cards that I pulled out for this particular call. So we have them here. This is not an original deck, but this deck is about 12 years old. And you'll see that I have written on the deck. And when a deck of cards gets older, I believe that it helps to retain their memory for their meanings. There's nothing wrong with you writing on your cards, and that helps you along a little bit. And it helps your cards too, but give them a rest. So let's get started. It was one evening. My shift went from about 10 p.m. until 4 a.m. in the next morning. It was late. I always work the overnight shifts. I get a call, and it's a farmer. We're going to call him Mr. Johnson. It was actually Mr. and Mrs. Johnson on the line with me. You could tell they were excited to get through, and they were excited to talk to me. They had known by the advertisements for the line that I was into the paranormal investigations way back then. So they were excited that they actually got a hold of me, and I was hopeful that I could help them. It was Mr. Johnson that started the call, and he explained that the community that he lived in and on his farm, he started to have animals disappear. Now, this wasn't anything like a predator animal coming in and taking them or someone else coming and taking them. There were also other farmers in the community that this was happening to as well. This area was densely wooded. They did not have a lot of field crops, but they did have a lot of livestock and animals and chickens and ducks, geese, lambs, cows, donkeys, horses. Now, it didn't matter what size. It would just, some of these animals would start disappearing. Now, it wasn't as though there was a possum in the chicken house. This left no trail. This left no noise. But you could hear howling that was very unnerving in the woods. When Mr. Johnson was talking to me about this, I grinned because you could hear his wife, Mrs. Johnson, in the background. Don't forget to tell her this, and don't forget to tell her that, and don't forget to tell her that we saw this figure standing out by the woods, and don't forget to tell her that we saw something and it just disappeared. And this went on and on. So while we were talking, I shuffled the cards, and I wanted to give them, yes, you're seeing that right, I wanted to give them an idea of what was happening. So I laid out the cards, and we started with the Devil, the Hangman, the Hermit, the Eight of Swords, the Eight of Cups, and we'll put this one here, and the Tower card. So as I'm reviewing this, Mrs. Johnson gets on the phone and she says, Zelda, I am unnerved. I don't want to leave our dogs out. I don't want to let our cats out. I am so scared to even have somebody stay in the barn at night. I am just scared, but whatever it is starting to show up in the daytime. And people are seeing whatever it is come out of this woods. So I asked what it looked like. Was it an animal? Was it human? Maybe was it something in between? I mean, after all, right? They said that it had the shape of a human, but was faint. It was, you could kind of see through it, but it was a misty figure that would just stand there and be watchful. Now, this same figure was showing up at other farms and other homes. And you didn't have to have a farm for all of this to start happening, because that was, I mean, there were, whatever it was not picky, right? So then Mr. Johnson starts telling me about as I'm laying the cards out, he starts telling me about this wasn't the first time. In fact, his grandfather, who owned the farm before them, reported the same things happening, only it was like skipping generations, and that there were problems. So they called the local sheriff. He came out, he was scratching his head. He was just dumbfounded. They never found any of the animals. They never found anything that was any indication that anything was taken or anything in that regard. So it was just very frightening. Now I'm going to go over the cards for a minute, and I want to share with you what I saw on my end. Now, obviously, there was something there that they couldn't explain. Paranormal, whatever it was. But they were in disarray. They just were dumbfounded. They did not know what to think about this. They wanted to stay and remain grounded. But at this point, they just felt their hands were tied. They just felt they didn't know what to do. And at one point, Mrs. Johnson wanted to leave the farm. She wanted to walk away. And this, when I asked her, were you thinking about getting a divorce? She admitted that she was. And I think Mr. Johnson, well, that was the first time that he had heard that. But she was scared. This shows, this Tower card, that there was definitely a shaky foundation that was going on. This was something they could not explain. They even had the local pastor come out and pray over the properties. Now, this was a very large farm community, to the point where they were having meetings in the churches and in the schools. They did not know what to do. This Ace of Spades basically tells me that, well, there was some nefarious activity going on. And sadly, it had been caused by a young man many years ago. And they told me about a story that their grandfather had told them of a young man walking in the woods and never coming back. And they didn't know if this represented them coming back, or this young man coming back, or if there was a portal open, or whatever the case may be. And I'm going to stop here and I'm going to say this. If you ever go in the woods, and if you ever see a staircase that leads nowhere, or you see something that looks like a staircase, don't go up there. Don't do it. It's better safe than sorry. And many times portals will have that type of entrance to attract others to come, because many times we've heard stories of people coming in, going up into these stairs and never returning. Now, I'll let that be. You can decide what it is that you want to think of and feel about that. But back to the story, Mrs. Johnson said it just got to the point where they were so unnerved, they did not know how this was going to end. Their imagination was going wild. She was so worried that she was under a doctor's care because in the meantime, animals were missing. And on a farm, your animals, that's a part of the farm. You depend on that. Now, this nine of spades showing up, meaning that imagination has been going crazy and wild, beside the nine of hearts, literally means that, well, there's something else going on here. Usually the nine of hearts is a card. The nine of hearts is a card that basically says that's your wish card. That's your yes card. But with and beside a card like the nine of spades, it means that there's more emotional upheaval. Could even mean emotional games, but in this case, not. It means that someone was messing with them emotionally, but this card was the saving grace of the whole reading. This 10 of hearts meant and means that there is light at the end of this tunnel. They're going to find out what has happened. Now, they did tell me, they asked me, there was a woman in their community that practiced white witch, white magic, and folklore. She was going to be using iron. And iron is, cold iron is something that you would use to banish. It can be even, they say, fairies. Right? Okay, well, we're going to talk about that. But fairies, ghosts, paranormals, they can close portals. It can banish bad witchcraft. It can banish something that is coming in. So she was about to go out to these properties and do whatever it was that she wanted to do. And they asked me about it. And I said, look, you've had the sheriff, you've had a pastor, you've had many other people coming out here, and actually it started to be a tourist attraction. Many people were coming there to see if they could see something, which was also a danger to many. There were people coming into town, they didn't even know who they were. So, the last I heard from them, they decided they were going to use this lady from their community to go out, do what she could to banish whatever it was that was going on. They called me one more time and told me that after she went out there, things calmed down. But they saw this tall figure. Mr. Johnson said he had to at least be over 7 feet tall, very thin, standing at the edge of the woods, at the edge of this little wooded forest area, and being watchful. But they said that he literally dematerialized, and he used that word, and I put it in quotes in my notebook. He dematerialized right in front of everyone's eyes. They all saw it. Now, I didn't hear from them again, and I always wished that I did. They know how to get a hold of me. Obviously, I'm on the line and you can look me up at this point. And if you're out there, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, and if you feel this story is reminiscent to what you called and told me, I would sure love to hear exactly what had happened. But what do you think it could have been? What do you think it is? Back then, we didn't talk much about aliens. Back then, we just didn't know what we know now. But this was a creepy story for me. It was a creepy call because I could hear the fear in their call, in their voices. And that was something that I did not like to hear. But to this day, as far as I know, it remains a mystery in this sweet little farming community. I want to thank you for being here tonight. Thank you so much. I really love telling my stories with you. Do me a favor, let me know in the comments what you felt this is. Did you get an idea about what do you think? Have you heard of something like this before? I'd love to hear your opinions. Make sure you follow me and subscribe, and so you don't miss any more stories coming about. But in the meantime, I wish you well. Be safe. Hug your loved ones. And I will see you again next time with Dark Tales of Zelda. Bye for now.